Good evening and welcome to NOLA Crime Crisis. I'm Norman Robinson. Halfway through the year, an informal survey of nationwide per capita murder rates shows New Orleans is on pace to reclaim its dubious ranking as the most murderous city in the U.S. And unfortunately, we are leading by a considerable margin. Now, this program is designed to bring together political, business, and civic leaders to open a dialogue and an honest discussion to aid in combating the disconcerting pace of crime and violence in our city. When we return, we will have an in-depth discussion about what our city officials are doing to help stop the crime wave. We have a great show planned for you this evening, so don't go far.
Our money, she's my purpose. I'm here to walk with her, hold her hand until she can walk alone. Kind of like being a father in this world.
Welcome back to NOLA Crime Crisis. The first step forward towards fighting crime in our city is by having a serious, honest discussion with members of the community who are concerned about solving the problem, earnestly concerned about solving the problem. Joining me now on our inaugural show are two individuals looking to make a difference in that regard. Mr. Rafael Goyeneche of the Metropolitan Crime Commission and Council Member Oliver Thomas, councilperson for District E. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us on our inaugural show. You know, this is a crucial issue that's not being addressed media-wide. We decided that it needs to be addressed and to do something about it by having you here on our inaugural show. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for doing this.
Let's set the table first. What are we facing and how did we get here? Mr. Goyeneche.
Well, I think it's important to take a look, figure out what happened. So we started doing that in 2020 when we started to see the crime trends increase. And historically, we've issued reports on the criminal justice system, and we used to do them annually. And during COVID, we started to see crime go up. So we started to put out monthly reports. And after my staff figured out how to do that, I said, let's do it weekly. So we've been tracking this weekly since the spring of 2020. And we've seen this, and we've been talking about these trends that have been advancing. And as the crime gets worse, the numbers of officers went down. And this problem has been ignored all through 2020 by our political leadership, through 2021 by our political leadership. And now, because the public now recognizes the extent of this crime surge that we're seeing, it just didn't start in 2022. No. This is 2 years and 7 months that the public is been ignored and forgotten about. And thank goodness for your station and you and Oliver and some of the council members that are stepping up and coming together and seeking some meaningful solutions to these trends, because we can fix it, but we can't fix it if we remain in silos. We can't fix it if all we're going to do is point the finger blaming each other for it.
So where are we with that, pointing the finger?
Well, first of all, kudos to Rafael. If you'll remember, in 2020, we did the show on increasing crime statistics, which Metropolitan Crime Commission. He came on the show, and I guess you could say I told you so, but you were looking at trends that were heading to where we are now. We actually dealt with that on WBOK, taking a look at the MCC's first reports. The challenge is coming together. I've been around long enough to know when working together works and when everyone is in their own silos, when it's fractionalized, that it doesn't work. That's a challenge right now. We have some political battles and battles about accountability and how stuff should happen. That is absolutely getting in the way of all of us coming together to fix it. Every time we've ever been successful with crime, it wasn't done by one branch of the government versus another. It wasn't done by one part of the criminal justice system versus another. It was everybody said was enough, and we came together to solve it. That's chronicled historically. That's still a challenge. I'm still hopeful. We've been having a lot of private meetings. Everyone knows that I've been trying to broker meetings with warring factions to get them in the same room.
Well, isn't that part of the problem? You have to broker meetings on an issue as as critical as this, you have to broker a meeting among political leaders who are fractionalized seemingly over this.
Well, I'm never going to give that up because the city is too important to stop getting everybody to the table. And every time we don't come to the table together, someone's life is lost, their car is jacked, they're assaulted, their property is stolen. So I'm hopeful we get through some of these hurt feelings. I'll never forget one of the most important things my father told me when he thought I was going to be recognized as a leader. He said, remember, your personal feelings don't mean anything. He said, the people who count on you don't count on you because of how you feel. The people who count on you is because how you can help make them feel. And I think too often political leaders today forget that. But also let me say something. And we've dealt with it on the Good Morning Show in conversations with Rafael and others. There is a sense of mental paralysis, I think, coming through COVID. And I actually believe we haven't looked at it like that. I'm not a professional in that area, but when I look at work paralysis and how the silos work, something has happened in the last couple years. And I don't think that is just egos, right? I think there's something mentally that's deeply entrenched in people where they've actually been stuck in their place, and it's difficulty in moving them from their place to the place where everybody needs to be.
So you think there might be some mental issues taking place among our political leaders?
Well, there's always been mental issues with political leaders. That ain't breaking news. That's nothing new. But I think the inability for many of us to get out of our way, to get together with others, something has happened there.
How do we get out of our way, Ms. Goyeneche?
Well, I think by focusing on the fact that public safety is deteriorating in this city. Public safety is not a white or black, rich or poor, uptown, downtown, red or blue. It's not a dividing factor, it's a uniting factor. And I think our political leadership needs to recognize that. And I think you're starting to see leaders like Oliver and some of the other council members put their political opinions aside and make decisions and advocate for what's in the best interest of public safety. Because if public safety is compromised, that means that this city cannot reach its potential. It's going to lose its economic base. Businesses aren't going to come here. Tourists aren't going to come here. We're going to lose jobs. We're going to lose our tax base. So this is about the future of this city. And I think the political leadership now recognizes it. A couple of weeks ago, we saw an historical coalition come together.
Absolutely.
And the Crime Commission is 70 years old this year. And I've never seen an organization come together from an idea to over 250 diverse civic groups in 6 weeks.
Yes.
And it's still growing. And it's not about race or political agendas, it's just about public safety. That's what the political leadership needs to focus on. There are solutions, but we can't do it if we're too busy fighting political battles.
One of the most important coalitions in the history of the city, at one of the most important times, dealing with the most important issue. Now,
You know, as well as I, that a lot of people have been pointing the finger at the mayor and the police chief. Does the buck stop there?
The buck stops with all of us. Now, when you talk about accountability, leaders can't run from accountability. The chief is the chief of police. So they also have to have the ability to cross the aisle, to work with people they otherwise would not want to work with, because the issue is too important for them. Our chief has to be able to communicate with the public. It has to be bottom up. Every time we've ever saw a crime, it was because the public was involved. Leadership, whether it was nonprofits, organizations like RAF and others, business community came together. The 254-member coalition is the reason why the technology ordinance passed. It's the reason now, and I think this is what Ralph and others are saying. This moment in time is extremely important because the community came together, got in the middle of the fighting, said this is what we want. So it's absolutely a time where we can keep them with us reset, and everybody move together. That's why this time is so critical and so important.
So how effective is this technology coalition ordinance that passed going to be in reducing the crime?
It's not going to be something they're going to use every day. Just as a police officer doesn't use his gun every day, doesn't use his handcuffs every day, doesn't use their body armor every day. But when they need it, they need it. And right now, the city has been advocating for successfully getting the FBI, DEA, ATF, U.S. Marshals, and state police to come and help. The irony is all of those agencies can use all of the technologies that have been banned in the city of New Orleans. And the city of New Orleans invested tens of millions of dollars in ringing the city in crime cameras. And only the NOPD can't utilize that technology in law enforcement. It makes no sense.
I started off, especially being a black man, growing up in the lower Ninth Ward, not always having positive encounters with police. And of course, my life is an open book of
Sure.
what I went through. I started off on the other side of being real skeptical and not being for it. But then the chief, Detective Chad Cochran, who works with NOPD and the FBI, and many other experts said, yes, this was a flawed technology a few years ago, but it has been improved. Nothing is perfect. And what we put in the ordinance, what they assured us is that, any official cannot use this. You can't use it to profile people. But this is what folk have to remember. This was what ultimately was the reason why it swayed me to be in support of it. We don't have a history in this city of people who shoot one or two people. If you look at the profiles of the people who've been highlighted on the news and been captured, their jacket for killing, for wounding, for manslaughter, for shooting people, 10, 11, 18, 20. So if we can get, the thing that I learned from the Surpass Comstat and Pennington Comstat eras was that they did something that people have forgotten about. They profiled the most dangerous people in the city. There was a list of 200 people that they said, whatever we have to do, we have to get this group off the street. Result, 60% reduction in violent crime and overall crime. It works.
And so what you're saying is that there's a way to accomplish this, and we have done it before.
Even with the crisis of staffing, we've broken down crime by police districts. And as horrible as this is going to sound, there's a silver lining to it. 50% of the violent crime in the city of New Orleans year to date is concentrated in 2 police districts. The 7th?
And the 5th.
And the 6th.
And the 6th. The 6th.
Seventh and the 6th.
Right.
Central City.
So,
still.
Why is that? Well, even with the police department with about 900 officers, the fact that it's so highly concentrated means that the department, even with its reduced resources, can now focus their resources on identifying the people that are responsible for the violent crime in those neighborhoods. And within those 2 districts, you can shrink it down to certain neighborhoods. So it's very tackleable. It's very, it can be accomplished, even with the crisis of staffing. And I think having this information and sharing it with the public lets the public know that there is a path forward, even while we're rebuilding the police
When
department.
you talk to Dr. Penny and Peter Sharp, many noted criminologists, in our interviews with them on the Good Morning Show, I think this is Dr. Wiesbrand and Niesbrand, he was a noted criminologist, one of their colleagues. He talks about the law of crime concentration. And this is the public conversation I've had with the chief from time to time. When you talk about concentrating on hotspots and maximizing your resources on those hotspots, we know where crime is emanating from. It was part of the Pennington Surpass plan. It was part of those joint task force. They concentrated on where the crime was. It doesn't mean you take away law enforcement from those other areas, but those hotspots, he's absolutely correct. Those hotspots have been there for the last several years.
So why aren't we concentrating on those areas now, since we have this intelligence?
Well, actually, so now there is a VCATE unit.
What does that mean?
I'm sorry. It's the rebranding of the old Tiger units and MAG units that Oliver was talking about. So you have the NOPD with their analytical and police detectives in this unit coupled with state police and FBI, and they are doing what Oliver just talked about, identifying the hot spots, who the offenders are that are responsible for a lot of this crime. So in the month of March, we had 28 homicides in the month of March. In April, early April, they arrested an 18-year-old and charged him with 4 homicides that occurred in the month. Tyrone Steele. He has been indicted now for 5 homicides. Another homicide was committed in February that they have linked him with. So you have one 18-year-old that was responsible for 5 homicides in a 30-day period of time. So by taking him off the streets, not only are you holding him accountable for those 5 homicides, but how many additional homicides did you prevent? Because he was a killing machine. And we have people like that in this community, and the only way that we're going to be able to successfully hold them accountable is by the police focusing their resources. They're doing it now. We have to give them some time to
The kid at Costco who was linked to anywhere between 11 and 18 incidents, including carjacking, and homicide. I think he was a teenager who had gone through the system, what, 20 or 30 times. And so, yeah, I mean, you know, you don't want stereotyping, you know, and profiling people because of race. But if you're being profiled because of murder, if you're being profiled because of carjacking, if you're being profiled because of your resume and crime, I want to know your profile.
So once the police do their job, then what? The police chief has been complaining about the judicial system
exactly.
ad nauseum.
So even with the declining numbers of officers, there's been over 2,100 felony arrests by the police department year to date. 36% of those arrests are for felony crimes of violence. So even with the diminishing numbers of officers, it shows that the police department is laser focused on the violent crime problem. And there's been a lot of sensationalism about police response times this week.
Yes, I saw that
2.5 hours. So that's a little bit misleading because that is taking into account the non-priority calls with the priority calls. And because the police department is at a staffing crisis, they have to triage what calls they respond to. Code 2 calls are calls that 911 in which they have to respond to with their lights on. Those are the most serious offenses. They're getting there. They're arresting people. The problem is that it's a system and it's only as strong as its weakest component. And what we're seeing is the DA is accepting cases for crimes of violence at the same rate as his predecessor. But where the problem is at the time the case is disposed of. So we're tracking that and we're releasing those statistics on a weekly basis. And what we're seeing is 9% of the violent cases that closed this year were guilty as charged. 56% of the violent felony cases that closed were closed either by dismissal or with a misdemeanor plea deal.
50%?
56%. So if you're talking about domestic violence, you know, you're looking at about 1/3 of all the violent crime arrests made by the police department are for domestic violence.
Part of that coordination Rafael talked about, we cannot understate how important that is. Judge Calvin Johnson, during those crime waves,
I know the judge well.
I'll never forget, he called a meeting in his chamber where he brought different components of the criminal justice system, from the police department, the DA, the city, to criminal court. And he pretty much said, hey, look, everybody's got to do better. Y'all got to write better reports. These people who've profiled their way into the system, y'all need to accept them and work with the police department. Don't just dismiss their reports when they get to violent offenders. The city's got to look at getting involved from criminal justice and funding. And that was all part of that effort. But that was a judge who got the DA, chief of police, city council, administration, called him to his chamber. And he says, I'm tired of seeing people I know who are hurting people go back on the street.
We need that. We need that now, is what you're saying.
Yesterday.
Yesterday?
Yesterday.
Give me a template for solving the crisis we're in. I started with Rafael. Now I'll go to you.
That level of coordination has to happen. From police making arrests, to juvenile court, to the district attorney's office, to the criminal court for adults. Everybody has to have a sense of what they're trying to accomplish in terms of this mission to keep our community safe. That's what has. It can't be that the DA is not talking to the chief, that juvenile court is not talking to the police superintendent, that they're not talking to the schools about this kid's profile in school, that where they already knew it was going to land him in the juvenile jail system. Criminal court judges cannot talk about their dockets are backed up, and we can't get people with the most violent offenses through the system to where they've earned their spot in a jail or prison someplace. And the city has to fund those programs that give us maximum results, all the while doing what they did in the 90s, right? You had the Pennington Surplus Plan on one track, but people forget the New Orleans Recreation Department budget was double. You had Each One Save One mentoring programs. You had conflict resolution task force that operated in our school systems, but everybody bought into the mission of keeping our city safe.
So there was an entire plan.
And also the business community. Rafael, you remember when they raised the money through the Chevron program to hire 1,900 kids?
Well, this coalition pledged to raise $15 million for programs for at-risk children. Over the next 3 years, and they've already raised well over $1 million towards this year. So that is unprecedented. I think it's a recognition that you're not going to fix it by putting all your eggs in one basket. You have to have a holistic approach. The business community recognizes it, the citizens recognize it, but the system is only as strong as its weakest component, and you cannot make decisions as silo organizations, because everything from arrest through incarceration and pretrial detention with the sheriff, through screening in the district attorney's office, to the judiciary, everything affects each other. It's all tied together. It's a big bowl of spaghetti. And you have to coordinate everything. So really, I think what needs to happen is the head of those organizations, they need to meet once a quarter and identify the strengths and accomplishments. And in between each of those meetings, they're working to address and identify and fix some of the problems. And then you're not going to eat that elephant in one meal, but you start to break it off into little pieces, and you make incremental improvements by working together.
And not being forced by anybody to do it because that's your job.
Exactly.
You're a component in the criminal justice system. And if we're going to make it sustainable, the school system has to be at the table. Every time I work with a school, or we volunteer, we start a program at a school has a folder on Oliver. Oliver's either a good student, he's in attendance, he listens, he achieves well. Oliver's a behavior problem. The parents don't come. He has some social issues. Looks like he can't see. He may need some medical attention or glasses, like kids we've worked with. The school system is at the base of what happens. And they need to be involved in, especially in identifying kids who are on the wrong track. They can be identified by the 3rd grade, period. New Orleans is leading the nation now in kids who drop out after the 6th grade, not just high school. So if the school system isn't at the table with truancy, if we aren't working together with truancy centers and some level of curfew, right, that gives some order to juveniles and adolescents being on the street at night, then they start with that product that's going to be our future before it gets to the police department or the juvenile system.
Well, let me ask you guys. You've talked about some interesting ideas, and you've mentioned some very key organizations that might be pulling some of these plans together. Who's going to lead them? Who's going to lead them? There has to be some leadership.
They're all elected or appointed officials. They're city employees, so. Essentially, the public now, and I think what you're seeing with this NOLA coalition, is that the silent majority has become the vocal majority. And I think the politicians are feeding off of that.
Look, people, Rafael is having his meetings with his organizations, sounded the alarm in 2020. I'm meeting every day, every week with critical groups. People are going to do that. But what we have to remember, it's not what you can do for your country, what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. Some of the greatest success that we had in fighting crime with Pennington and Surpass and Morial, 3,000 people marched on City Hall.
Wow. We don't have that sense of outrage.
Well, no, 254 organizations just came.
And they represent much more than 3,000 people.
Yeah.
Just came together.
Okay.
So look, we would all love to have that political savior or Jesus to pick us for the second coming until somebody protests against second comings, right? It's not zoned for that. But what I see now is the people coming together. If we're smart as leaders, all we need to do is hold arms and join together with the people. The people are moving in the right direction. We just need to leave our political agendas and our personalities or who we like at the table and work with the public. The public has come together.
Well, gentlemen, I'd like to continue this conversation, and I'd like you to make a pledge that you'll be with me again.
Absolutely.
So we can discuss the issues that I didn't get to. I didn't get to the issue about guns, and I didn't get to the issue that I want to talk to specifically about juveniles. So will you come back?
Absolutely.
And
Anytime.
join me in that conversation?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank
Glad
you.
to.
Yes.
Thank you. Oliver Thomas, Councilman from New Orleans City Council, District E, and Rafael Goyeneche from the Metropolitan Crime Commission. Thank you again, gentlemen.
Sure.
More NOLA Crime Crisis when we return. Don't go far.
Don't just plan to retire, plan to live. An annuity helps cover your essential monthly expenses, so you're free to live the life you want. Find out how an annuity can give you lifetime income at protectedincome.org.
Crime in our city impacts every citizen in the community. Let's hear how some of the residents of New Orleans feel about the safety in our city.
Do you ever think New Orleans will become a safer place to live?
Not really, because I'm in the military. Well, actually I retired, and I came from out in New York. And I remember I was stationed on the base in Belle Chase, and this was back in '96. And I lived on the base, and a lot of individuals didn't go out in town, like into New Orleans. And a lot of the veterans were saying that, how the crime was, and they would talk about it a lot, like every year it was like 1, 2, 3 rated, like the murder rate, every year was always pretty high. And now this is 2022, and it looks like we're still high, as far as crime and stuff like that. So if you ask me 10 years from now or 20, will it have changed? And I'm not that positive that it is until a lot of infrastructure changes, education, so forth and so on.
We would again like to thank our two guests for joining us here on NOLA Crime Crisis. We will be back next month with more city leaders, business owners, and also we'll hear from citizens on the streets to find out how we can make the city of New Orleans a safer place to live. I'm Norman Robinson, and we'll see you next time on NOLA Crime Crisis.